if you want to improve your wrestling, then you need to listen to people who actually did it. I know what people say. Oh, but that guy watches so much film of wrestling. Whatever. Oh, I watch Kung Fu film. Does that make me a Kung Fu expert? That is the dumbest fucking thing I've ever heard in my life. Like, just because somebody watches somebody wrestle and studies it doesn't mean that they know how to do it. I know that they don't know how to do it because I've watched their instructionals. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today, I need to talk about something. And I know it's going to be controversial and I know it's going to hurt people's feelings, but probably not controversial because I think most people agree on it, but it's going to hurt some people's feelings or whatever, but it needs to be said. So first thing I'm going to say is this. The whole reason that I started my channel in the first place was to help people. Okay, I've been coaching wrestling for a long, long time. Okay, I started wrestling back in 1991, and I really started coaching as a collegiate wrestler when my assistant coach was running a wrestling club, and we would help out. And then I learned from him, and he my assistant coach was the head coach of the Olympic team, head coach of the world team, Greco. Okay, but he was also an NCAA champion and four-time All-American, so he's good at all styles. And I started doing jiu-jitsu like 4 years ago, and I realized like right away, I mean, like these guys don't know the basics of how to control people from the standing position. So forget the takedown thing. That's what people always want to know. Like, well, how do I take somebody down? And I'm like, the first thing that you need to do is know how to stand. The first thing you need is a stance, because I don't want him taking me down. Okay. The other thing about it is that I need a stance because in order for me to make my takedown attempts work, I need to have the most powerful position that I can have. And I need to be able to maintain that position throughout the takedown. So I put a lot of content on YouTube for free. Then I made an instructional with Jordan Presenger on this very thing because I really want to help people in jiu-jitsu. It's really, I think it's more fun than coaching high school kids wrestling because I find coaching adults is very rewarding. I don't know, kids coaching was also very rewarding, but I kind of like working with adults. They seem to cut through the fat a lot faster and understand. So it's not that in jiu-jitsu, people are incapable of learning wrestling. I get this all the time. People say stuff to me like, oh, I'm like in my 20s. Like, can I learn how to wrestle? Like, of course you can. I mean, what would you think? You all of a sudden can't learn something because you started it, too late in your life and like you can't wrestle now? Like, that is nonsense. Okay. Like I didn't start doing judo until I was very much an adult. And, and then I went back to it in my 40s, like at 43 years old. Blew out my ACL. That's another story. but I'm a lifelong learner too, so I can still learn things. So people DM me all the time and they ask me, why does wrestling suck so bad in jiu-jitsu? Okay, this is the thing that's going to hurt people's feelings. And I know all of the arguments to this. I've heard them all. I've read them all too online. It's not wrestling, it's jiu-jitsu. I mean, you can say that, but if you're using wrestling moves to try to take somebody down, kind of wrestling, right? And we say in wrestling, like, there's multiple styles of wrestling. We always say wrestling is wrestling. So Greco-Roman rule sets look nothing in the strategy, looks nothing like folk style wrestling. Okay, but it's still wrestling. You're still the same principles of head position, the same principles of inside position control and hip position, and all of those things are all the same. Okay, and the stances, and this is where I really get into this, the instructional, the stances matter. Okay, the hand fighting strategy, the hand fighting techniques need to follow the position of the stance. So that is my hand fighting strategy for somebody who's in like a folk style wrestling stance where they're sort of more, their shoulders are more leaning forward, right, is going to be different than when somebody's in like a Greco-Roman stance. And this is one of the fundamental problems that I see in jiu-jitsu is that people are in a much more upright stance, but they're trying to use moves like the most one I get all the time is the collar tie, right? Everybody's trying to reach for collar ties. First of all, you should never reach. Okay. If you're not getting a head position on somebody first and you're not like touching this part of their body first, you should never reach towards the head. Reaching towards the head in any style of wrestling is a big problem. If you do it in Greco, you are going to get suplexed. And the stances are very similar. People in jiu-jitsu and Greco stand more upright. I covered this on my instructional as to why people like to do it. They're afraid of getting to drop their head so they don't get choked. But the choke comes not from your head being higher than somebody, even though that could help. It's from your spinal alignment being bent, right? So if you want to guillotine somebody, their back has to be like this. Try guillotining somebody like this, even if you're taller than them. It just doesn't work very well because when their back is straight, you need their head to be here and you need their back to bend. It doesn't work. You can't collar tie somebody when their spine is like this because their legs are underneath them. They're not leaning forward. And so when you pull out on their head, right, their front leg is out farther than where their shoulder alignment is. So you're pulling straight down into their quads, which is going to easily be able to support the weight. And your back's in this kind of alignment. If I try to pull somebody down on a collar tie like this, it doesn't work. Okay. And this is why you see it not working in jiu-jitsu. You see people doing these 20 fucking minute long collar tie battles, and they're inefficient and they're ineffective and they're boring as hell to watch. Okay. And you'd be like, if this match is 2 to 3 times longer than a traditional wrestling match, why aren't these guys capable of getting anybody out of position and scoring at all? Is it because their defense is so good? No, it's not. Okay. Like I've seen guys get in on a single leg and they can hold it for 25 seconds or longer in some cases, 20 something seconds, and not like get taken down off of that. If you in high school grab a single leg and hold it for more than a few seconds, that person's defense is going to end up working against you. Okay. So what's going on here, right? Why isn't it working? So in most cases, what you have, and this is, I've seen this, trust me, from the own schools that I've been at, right, is you have one jiu-jitsu instructor, head lead instructor, and no wrestling coaches. And that person is teaching you how to take people down in the gi, which is like old judo rules where you're allowed to grab the legs too. And then, also using the gi like judo, and trying to teach you how to do no gi wrestling, basically takedowns. And they've neither wrestled nor have they done judo. Now, let me ask you something. Okay, because this seems to fly all the time in jiu-jitsu, where you're like, my instructor is teaching me all the takedowns and everything. They've never done judo. They've never done wrestling. That's fine. And they think that that's fine. And then it's like, well, but then if you read things on the internet, it's like a judoka trying to teach people how to wrestle. People flip out about that. Oh, well, you don't have the gi on. You don't know what you're doing, sir. And then if it's like, oh, they're doing like newaza. Oh, their jujitsu sucks. Their groundwork sucks. And then imagine like going to a wrestling coach and being like, hey, can you teach me how to do judo? Hey, can you teach me how to do jujitsu? People would flip out. You can't do that. Wrestlers don't know how to do jujitsu. And it's like, yeah, they don't. Right? Unless they actually practice jujitsu. So why is it okay then that a jujitsu person with absolutely no wrestling experience whatsoever can teach you wrestling, but then later the argument becomes because it's not wrestling, because it's jujitsu? And it's like, I've heard all these arguments before. Okay. Danaher's actually the one that really started this and really pushed it in that direction. He said, okay, we're talking to Bernardo, and I've heard him say it more than once. You can't use wrestling because their high amplitude throws have no control. You can't use judo because the high amplitude throws have no control. And, if you don't have a jacket on, you can't do those moves or whatever. Okay. Sounds like a good argument until you watch and I did a review of the Standing the Ground too, where he just took the entire American scholastic wrestling system. Okay. He stole the whole thing. Okay. And like all of it. Okay. And then slapped it on, called it scrimmage wrestling. And it's not, it's folk style wrestling. And it's like, oh, but wait a minute. What about all that control when you get to the ground? Well, yeah, because it was overstated. I mean, like Jordan Burroughs is in freestyle and he's not, he doesn't suplex anybody. He doesn't have any, well, actually suplex does kind of have control, but he's not throwing people without control. He's a double leg guy. And that's a great move in jiu-jitsu. If you get somebody out of their stance, they're standing upright, you blast double them, take them down low, wrap the legs up past the guard. It's a great takedown for it. So it was really overstated. Okay. It's a great selling point. It was like, and actually I know that this was true. I heard it written. Yeah. Read it. And I heard him say it. It's like, you need an entirely new system. You can't use bolt on. He said, you can't bolt on wrestling, but hey, here's this instructional where I use all the wrestling moves and some judo moves. And if they were wrestling moves where you had a judo equivalent, use Japanese names to call them things and then call it scrimmage wrestling. Okay. So I was sold on it. A lot of other people were sold on it. Don't be mad about it, but That's what happened, okay? So the argument that you can't use wrestling and jiu-jitsu is a dead argument. John killed it, okay? Because then he put out an entire wrestling instructional using all the moves that we already know that work in wrestling. And but why doesn't it work though? And it's because the hand fighting needs to match the stand-up position. If you're standing upright, you can't hand fight the same way. You're not going to be collar tying people and have it be effective. Writing's on the wall. You can argue with me all you want about it. Watch any jiu-jitsu match and you'll see the collar tying to the snap down thing isn't working because they're not selling it. You know what I mean? Like if you want to collar tie snap down to work well, you have to like get inside position and push people till they push you back and then snap. You don't just grab it and hold it. If you grab it and hold it, the person's back stiffens up. Now in wrestling, if you do that, if you pull down and their back stiffens up, you drop your level and go under him and shoot, which you don't see that much in jiu-jitsu. You should. I mean, and people always say, oh, yeah, because they're going to get choked. And I'm like, I see people hold a single leg for 25 seconds and don't get choked. So it's not that hard to not get choked if you have good head position on your single leg, okay? Just such a dead argument. Like you can't use those anymore, okay? It doesn't work. Otherwise, you would see that every single person who ever got a single leg in jiu-jitsu got choked out, and they don't, okay? It just doesn't, it's not a very strong argument, okay, is what my point is. Another thing are these 50-50 hand grip positions. I don't know why people teach it in jiu-jitsu. And it's all over the place. I mean, look at it. You see people, they come right out and then they try to accept the grips and then the other person just gives them their hands. Like anybody who's any good that knows how to wrestle, and like I've said this before on my channel, said on the instructional, I have wrestled with international competition, like in Europeans. You're not getting your hand back. And if you do get it back, those fingers aren't going to work the same way ever again. You go interlacing finger grips with people. You go to these palm grips. Well, what happens when you want to switch your position? Oh, he has to agree to let go of your hand. Like there's going to be some gentleman agreement. And it's taught all over the place. I mean, John shows it all over the place on his channel. It's like their strategy to do these hand fight positions. You see Gordon do it. You see Marigali do it. You see John do it. I mean, all you got to do is look at the Instagram, look at the actual matches. It accomplishes nothing. It is a pointless endeavor. Don't do it. Avoid it. You want to have good head position. You want to dismantle your opponent by having like isolate a side of their body. You get inside control. That's why I like the underhook with the head on the same side position, because I've isolated his body. Now, if I get my thigh inside, the inner thigh contact, now he can't uchimata me and everything, can't do any turn throws because I've blocked his hips. Right? And this is a classic, well-known thing that everybody knows in Greco and Judo. It's important too. Like if somebody has the right grips to do uchimata, I want to deny them that inside hip position. Now, the thing about Judo is that if they have an over the back grip, they can quite easily, trip you now from the outside. But in wrestling, the overhook grip is definitely not as powerful as an underhook grip. And I know people say, well, it works for me. And I'm like, well, you haven't wrestled anybody tough then, because generally speaking, if I have an overhook, I'm looking to get inside position with my hip because I know that my hip position is far more powerful than the actual overhook. Whereas like if I have underhook position, it is better if I have my inside leg pit in, but if I don't, I still have very powerful position if my head is in the right place, right? But a lot of these coaches, I mean, they're not teaching proper head position. They're teaching 50-50 hand grip positions, which amount to nothing. They go nowhere. And honestly, like, I don't have to defend my position on this too much because everything that I said would happen did happen. If you watch the last ADCC and you watch my ADCC 2022 video, you can see all the people leaving single legs for side body locks and getting uchimata, right? And like I called that long before ADCC that this was a bad position because it's known from wrestling it's a bad position. Okay, and so a lot of these problems can be solved quite easily by just having like good fundamental wrestling skills. Who are you going to learn good fundamental wrestling skills from? You're not going to learn it from somebody who's doing jiu-jitsu who's never wrestled before. You're going to learn it from somebody who actually knows wrestling and jiu-jitsu. Okay, that's important too. You want to know that, okay? Like if somebody's never done jiu-jitsu, they probably need to do some jiu-jitsu so that they understand the rules matter in terms of like, the strategy for when you get somebody to the ground, how you get to the ground. You don't want to end up in a bad position when you get there, okay? Now, I don't mean in their guard. That's a lazy person's way of thinking about this, like you end up in somebody's guard. I mean, you don't want to end up in their submission hold, okay? So you need to, but you can use very classic fundamental wrestling to end up in very good positions. Mika Galvo is a good example of somebody who's doing an excellent job of doing this. He's combining head pinch position, chest wrap positions, and using it to get to launch people to then get in a top position, right? And or taking away when they do bad position on underhooks where their head's pulled away from it, like when he wrestled against, or when he fought PJ Barch. Barch had his head pulled out of position, so he was able to do a flying armbar. He wouldn't have been able to do that if his head had been in the right position. And I think that Barch just kind of didn't think about it too much. He just sort of pulled his head away and then boom, like he capitalized on it. And that's because Mika actually knows how to wrestle quite well. Okay, so you can use very good classic wrestling and then combine it with jiu-jitsu. And this is why I think you need a good wrestler with good fundamentals. What needs to happen is that the people who know wrestling well need to teach the jiu-jitsu guys what to use, how to use it, right? Why to use it, when to use it, how to use it, all those things, right? Because it's not people's fault. It's not their fault that they're in jiu-jitsu. I'm saying it's not their fault that they don't know how to wrestle, because they're being taught by people who don't know how to wrestle, who've never wrestled, and they're reaching with the same arm, same leg, collar ties. You see it all over the place. It's on all the Instagrams. It's on every match. I'll show you all kinds of photographs of these people. They're learning it from the instructors themselves. Reaching with the same arm, same leg is going to get you in so much trouble. It is so easy. There are match after match after match I can show you where in wrestling, where people only do it for a split second. It's not even way out of position like it is in jiu-jitsu, where people are so out of position in jiu-jitsu when they do it. You're just giving the guy access to your legs. I cover this on my instructional, I cover it on my channel, right? I'll show you some NCAA footage of it, right? Where like you can see a Rujao do it to Fix. And Fix is a junior world champion, and he just for a split second reached with the same arm, same leg, and Rujao's so good. He saw it, thumb posted him, lifted him up, took him straight to his back in the semifinals of the NCAA tournament last year, right? And then he went on to become a world champion. And so it works at that level, okay? And those guys have good wrestling stances, which means that their head is going to be in the way. And jiu-jitsu guys are standing so upright that they don't even have head position anymore. So you're past their head. Now you only have to worry about their hands. And the hand fighting skills in jiu-jitsu are fucking terrible, because you just see people like fake, like I just saw Marigali last night do this to and his last fight against Penna. He faked like he was going to reach for a collar tie, which isn't the war strategy in the world. And then he just shot in on the leg. But it's like Penna should have just been able to drop his hands down with basic defense and block him, and so you should never reach with two hands, right? For sure. And Penna reached up like as Marigali fake reached and then shot on him. Okay. That's not much of a setup. It just goes to show you that if it works at that level, because the wrestling is very bad. Okay. And it's not their fault. This is how they're being taught. It's in all the wrestling that's being taught needs to be revised like tremendously in order to be effective. But a lot of it starts with the fact that like the way that people are doing it, right? The way that people are approaching the hand fighting is not matching the stance. Now, I argue that standing upright in jiu-jitsu isn't a good idea anyway, okay? Like if you can have more flex in your knees, more flex in your legs, and still have a straight back and not get choked, and then you're so easily going to be able to get past the person's head defense, right? That's the first line of defense, and past their hands, the second line of defense, with some basic hand fighting skills. I show a lot of Greco, not a lot. I show some Greco on the instructional, because if you're one, I mean, you may not want to shoot your old whatever, maybe you're really tall, all these things. But I also show like you don't have to go to your knees to get a lot of these shots, because people are so out of their stance to begin with. Okay, so if you want to improve your wrestling, then you need to listen to people who actually did it. I know what people say. Oh, but that guy watches so much film of wrestling. Whatever. Oh, I watch Kung Fu film. Does that make me a Kung Fu expert? That is the dumbest fucking thing I've ever heard in my life. Like, just because somebody watches somebody wrestle and studies it doesn't mean that they know how to do it. I know that they don't know how to do it because I've watched their instructionals and they don't truly understand what push-pull means. I've seen it. Push-pull does not mean that you grab a hold of somebody and shake them. Are you pushing them and pulling them? Yeah, but that's not what that means, okay? It's much more intricate than that. And I cover it on my instructional, and I cover a little bit on my channel, which is like, I push the person until they stop me. I stop pushing them. They're pushing now. They lean forward. Their postural alignment gets out, right? Now I pull them. So it's really push. He pushes. I stop pushing. He comes in because he was already pushing. I let go, and then I pull. That's how that works. Okay, I've seen John teach this where he like gets behind somebody and just shakes their hips. You just grab their hands and you're fucking out, man. Like, I don't know where that came from. But like, that's not push pull. Okay. And then I know that, like, I've watched the instructionals that he has. He doesn't really teach the classic way of wrestling and push pull. Now he's starting to talk about it though. Okay. Because I called him out for it on the Gordon Ryan video. Now he's starting to talk about it a little bit, and he does that. He'll start talking about it. Trust me now. I mean, he listens. He pays attention. Like, but you know, and I want him to be able to teach it, but he hasn't been. Okay, historically, he has not taught how push pull works properly, and none of these guys are teaching how push pull really works. Okay, they may say it, and they may write dissertations on their Instagram posts about what it means, but they don't really teach it in the classic sense of how it's taught in wrestling. You can tell the difference between some of how good some of these jiu-jitsu guys are when you watch their ground games and you see that they understand, like, pushing, and then the guy pushes back and then they drag, right, to take the back and stuff. So they do understand the push pull on the ground very well. And I mean, John's probably one of the greatest jiu-jitsu people on the ground ever, right? And more than that, he's probably one of the greatest coaches to prepare his athletes for competition than ever. Because if you look at how his athletes do in competition, they don't gas. And I think it's because he has a pulse on their training and like how hard they're pushing it. And then he backs off maybe. And if they're overtrained or whatever, I mean, I think he's has a very good sense of the pulse of the room and how hard people are training and everything. And then that makes him that much better of a coach. Okay. But in terms of like preparing people for how to take people down and everything, I mean, if his systems on takedowns were working so well, then we would just see him demolishing people. And we don't. Like, we do not see his guys demolishing people on their feet at all. And when they do get takedowns, they're pretty sloppy. Okay. Frankly. And I mean, it's fun. I'm not saying it's not effective at any level or whatever. I'm just saying it needs to be better. It could be better. It needs to be better. And like, but you also have to keep this in mind, because I know people say this all the time. Like, you know, does Gordon Ryan need to have an amazing takedown game? No. Does Marigali need to have an amazing takedown game? No. You know why? Because their freaking guards are so good that it doesn't matter how the fight goes to the ground. But you're not Marigali. You're not Gordon Ryan. And so you're not those people. So if you think your guard is that good that you just don't need to be able to take somebody down and get in a top control position, then by all means, you know, but most people kind of want to start to have better wrestling skills because they want to be able to take control of that match and take it to the ground how they want, when they want, how they want. Okay. And that's what's going to help you take your jiu-jitsu to another level is when you can control when the fight gets to the ground, how it gets to the ground, and what position you end up in when you get to the ground. When you get to the ground and you've got somebody on their back, well, then now they're doing jiu-jitsu, and hopefully you're past their guard. And if not, well, then you have to use jiu-jitsu to pass their guard. And this notion that everybody asks me about, it's like, oh, but that takedown, that could end up in his guard. So what? Like, you know, like, use jiu-jitsu to pass the guard then. If you're so worried to take a shot on somebody because you're going to end up in their guard, like, well, what happens when they pull guard on you then? You know, so you need to get that out of your head. Like that whole like notion of, oh, well, I'm going to end up in his guard. Oh, well, or he's going to end up on my back. Okay. Like, learn how to wrestle, like, and stand up, learn how to wrestle and reverse the position. Granby, stand up, switches, head shrug, all the things that I've shown on my channel. I didn't show a switch on my channel, but you get the idea. Like, you need to learn how to wrestle from all positions. You need to know how to do jiu-jitsu from all positions. Otherwise, you're going to be an ineffective grappler. So I hope this kind of helps to clarify things. I think wrestling will get better. I think, though, it's going to have to come from wrestlers. If you want my opinion on who I think are good wrestlers, I know this isn't in any order. These are just people who I happen to like, watch, people who are good at taking you to the ground and having good control. I think Brandon Reed is a great option. Guy's a 3-time national champion in wrestling, and he's doing quite well in jiu-jitsu. He's a big guy, but he moves super, super fast and super well. And honestly, if you watch what he teaches, it's not very different than what I teach. It's classic good wrestling. Another one is Michael Trasso. He also has phenomenal technique, very similar to what I do. We also like wrestled in college quite close to each other. So I think the styles actually match up quite well. And he's very good at jiu-jitsu. John Marsh, He's another great collegiate wrestler who is obviously very good at jiu-jitsu, and JT Torres' coach. There's a reason why JT Torres' wrestling is so good. Who else? Oh, J-Flow. Holy crap. Yeah. I mean, watch J-Flow, right? These are all people who have legitimate wrestling skills, you know, and you're not going to see them just reaching for people. This reaching thing's got to stop. It's telegraphing. I mean, the other person's back is just going to stiff up. Now, you should learn how to use that to your advantage and drop your level and take them down when they do that. Okay. Because you're halfway there. They've literally got zero like head defense. Okay. So it's quite easy to take people down when they're standing upright like that. So that's what my recommendation would be. Okay. You watch those people, watch some of the stuff that I've put out too, and you'll see that there's a lot of similarities in the philosophies of how you move people around. There's only so many ways to move somebody. Okay. And that's the most effective way of doing it, is to use classic wrestling taught by somebody who's been classically trained in wrestling, not somebody who's just watching it. Okay. Like watching it and doing it and having competed in it are two completely different things. This doesn't mean, by the way, that as a jiu-jitsu coach or as a jiu-jitsu competitor that you can't learn how to wrestle. My advice, though, is that when you buy wrestling instructionals for jiu-jitsu, that you buy them from people who actually know how to wrestle, because then you're going to get the details that make these systems, not moves, systems matter. A lot of people can show you moves, and then they're one-trick ponies. They don't teach you how to switch and chain wrestle to different moves. But it's odd, because if you watch those same people do jiu-jitsu, oh man, they got whole systems of leg locking systems and everything. And that's because that's what they understand, right? And that's where you can see the holes in the game. Like their jiu-jitsu is amazing. The wrestling is very entry level. Okay, so hopefully that clarifies some things. Hopefully this helps you. Stop collar tying people who are standing upright. Okay, you have to use some Greco to do that. Watch some Greco, and you'll see that people don't do that. Okay, and it's because it's ineffective. And learn how to hand fight people from different postures, and you'll go a lot further. Okay, so next time, thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe if you like the content. Feel free to ask questions for me on Instagram. DMs are an easy way to get a hold of me. Thanks again.